On this episode of Book Reports podcast,
the CIA is being a jerk.
Wayne Newman
inspirational quotes from Saddam Hussein,
announcing the end,
the wonderful world of Arsenic,
and much, much more.
Welcome to Book Reports Podcast, a monthly podcast of intelligent books and stupid jokes. I'm Sam Tyler.
I'm Bryce Diener.
And every month we bring you books for discussion, dissection, and sense of humor. We have a rarity today in that we have a guest we're looking forward to talking to. Something new and different.
Even more rare, it's a woman.
So stop doing the dishes, ladies, and start talking about books.
It's 2019. We finally considered you equal with us.
You got the vote, you've got the Lifetime channel, and now you've got Book Reports Podcast.
The final frontier.
Thank you very much for joining us, and why are you leaving, Jenna Wright? Very glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
It is a double thrill for me to have you on here, because as our listeners know, I have talked about spies and espionage for a long, long time. And you're a guest who can finally confirm to everybody that I'm full of crap. So that's something I think we're all really looking forward to.
Okay.
You're going to school for what again?
I'm studying criminal psychology and strategic intelligence, so I'm learning how to take data as ambiguous and empty or no clue where it's coming from, but to be able to create a product out of that and to apply psychology through it so you can understand the source. You can better understand the information coming out of it.
So intelligence analysis and being able to make the hard calls using very, very few amounts of data.
Yeah.
That is a perfectly wonderful thing, I think.
So is the eventual hope to work for the FBI or like the police in some...
I'm hoping to do NSA or CIA, something a lot
Wow.
Yeah, something around there. You never know where that's gonna go, so...
Oh, I do. I did a book on it, Jenna.
Okay.
You're not talking to a couple bum amateurs here, Jenna. We read books about this stuff occasionally.
I read a book like months ago. I think I know what I'm talking about.
Alright, you know what you're talking about.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you.
So most of the books you probably read since you're going to school are probably on these subjects.
Yeah.
What do you read when it's for fun?
For fun, I mostly read nonfiction, so like different crimes that took place, or...
So, true crime
Yes,
books?
true crimes. Often read things about different wars, espionage, good stuff.
You're right up our alley.
Alright, man, I should have been here more often.
It sounds like a lot of the stuff that you enjoy reading, you have to read now. Does that take away the fun of reading them, or is it channeling you to find the best books you can on the subjects?
It helps me find the best books there are because my professors are former intelligence officers. And
What?
yeah, it's pretty sweet. So I'm a very abnormal person in that I love school. I love to learn constantly. I took a specific class because of a paper that was in it. So, yes.
If I take this class, I get to write this paper?
Exactly. And then when I submitted it, I was like, wow, that was the whole reason I took this class. And now it's over.
A lot of people that we've talked to on the show who are doing further education tend to complain a fair amount about the fact that they're just reading books they have to read now. That tends to be a common theme we get. So it's really great to hear somebody who is actually getting something out of books they're forced to read. That's wonderful.
It is wonderful.
A lot of the people I talk to about enjoying reading books tend to say that they don't enjoy reading books because they were forced to read so much as a kid or something like that. I don't understand that. I mean, imagine hating movies for that reason.
Yeah.
Or music.
I was forced to get in the car with my parents as a child. Now I hate cars. So the book that I chose for this month is The Great Escape by Paul Brickhill. So Paul Brickhill actually was I believe he was a British POW, and the intro for the book was written by an American POW. So The Great Escape is actually a story of a POW camp in German-occupied Europe that housed Australian, American, and mostly British soldiers. It was called Stalag Luft 3. They were trained that if you're captured, your only job is to escape constantly and to always distract them, to keep them busy.
Tie up their resources.
Exactly. And to keep them distracted so that we can keep fighting them and hopefully get to you. Or you can escape and come back to us so that you can keep fighting. And so The Great Escape was this incredible endeavor that was taken on by the POWs at Stalag Luft 3. What they originally started doing was digging shallow tunnels, maybe about 3 feet or so underneath the ground. until the Germans caught on, and what they would do is drive heavy wagons around.
Oh.
They said that at least one tunnel, a horse's hoof went down into the tunnel.
Oh, dear.
That's awkward.
Yeah. And so they were like, okay, we need to dig a lot deeper.
He got to wait out the war in peace and comfort after that, I think.
I'm just picturing someone being underneath in the tunnel and then there's a horse.
And so they're like, oh, we need to dig deeper. And what they found out was that the Nazis actually buried microphones and were constantly monitoring to hear the sounds of digging so that they knew to look for more tunnels. The microphones only get to about 30 feet. We need to go deeper than that.
Oh,
so they
okay.
dug straight down past 30 feet and then started digging horizontally out. They started building 3 tunnels because their idea was that if one is found, hopefully the odds are that the other 2 won't be. So they named them Tom, Dick, and Harry. So you're not saying, hey, this tunnel we're digging over here.
Secret tunnel number 1, secret tunnel number 2, secret tunnel number 4. Yeah. We're skipping 3.
And so they had all these these secret codes. They had secret signals that they had to tell each other that, hey, there's a German coming. Get out of the tunnels. Wrap it up. We need to be in this cabin, and so on and so forth. They had an entire network of people who were making civilian clothes. So that way, when you did eventually make it out...
Well, you're not wearing a prison uniform.
Yes.
Or
an
American officer uniform.
That guy looks like he's in the American Air Force.
Yes, I'm German. Howdy, partner.
Convenient.
99 Luftballons. Am I right, everybody?
Dankeschön, darling. Dankeschön.
And that was Wayne Newman. Wait, what is it? Wayne Newton.
My favorite off-brand Las Vegas singer.
/ Thousand Island Dressing.
Wayne Newman.
The name that came to mind was Wayne Gretzky, so I didn't say it. That's why
better.
it screwed me up.
Okay.
Hey,
Dankeschön, eh?
you miss 100% of the tunnels you don't take, okay?
Okay.
What they also did was they created counterfeit currencies and counterfeit passports and different kind of passes, because in this time, Germany had all these checkpoints that you needed certain passes to get. So a passport wasn't enough. You needed a reason, you needed proper paperwork so that the German government made sure that you were actually coming back to Germany, not just escaping. They constantly had just simple plans at the beginning of ways to escape. One of the early ones was there were trucks full of pine branches and stuff like that. And as they were driving past the cabins, people were jumping off the roofs of the cabins into the pine branches to try to make it out. And as the trucks were...
Operation Christmas Child.
Santa Claus is coming to town. Saturday, Santa Claus is coming to town. And they said so many people were doing it that if you were jumping off the roof, you had to make sure you weren't jumping on somebody as you were jumping onto these multiple trucks of pine branches.
Okay.
How many guys were in the prison camp? Did they give a number for...
Quite a few hundred, actually.
Okay. I was going to say, if there's enough that there's that many escape attempts going on independently...
Yeah, I want to say there was at least 500, but I mean, I don't want to have that cut, so...
You don't want to have that cut? You want me to leave it in?
I don't want it to make it, because you'll probably be like, it was only 2, Bryce. 2 people.
And they were digging 3 tunnels.
They really threw them off. One guy kept watch.
And the other guy took, and they had to give him code names.
Yeah.
The Great Escape. George and Harold got away.
One of the tunnels was figured out, so that was filled in, I believe, with cement, and so it couldn't be used anymore.
Filled in with cement?
I believe it was cement, or they just filled it in with more dirt.
That's certainly not a tunnel anymore. It's just interesting that they didn't just fill it with dirt. Dig around it, I guess, would be the thing. Just kind of strange that they just filled it with cement.
I mean, that's a lot of cement.
It is.
Which is expensive.
It was really hard dirt.
I'm not doubting that it happened. I just think it's interesting they took the trouble to, instead of just filling in the tunnel with dirt, fill it with cement. That's more of a symbol than really efficiency.
The night of the big escape, or the great escape, rather, shows up.
The night of the really big escape.
The giant exodus.
The huge get out of here.
I believe they had at least over 100 men that were going to escape this night. Normally it's 1 or 2 people trying to escape. This was just a massive, great escape. What they would do is the tunnel was in the one cabin, and so they had people almost like a conveyor belt. 5 minutes have passed, you go in, and the next person lines up. And so the next cabin, they send someone from their cabin, sneak over, avoid the spotlights, make it into the cabin, and so on and so forth. And that's how they get 100 or so guys, because at night they're locked in by the Germans so that they can't escape during the night. It is a moonless night, so it makes it a lot easier for them to try to escape. And so as they're going going and getting guys out and out through the tunnel and past the wire and past the fences into the woods, and then they go their merry way. Part of the tunnel, I believe, actually collapses. And so, yeah.
That's got to be awful to be the next guy.
Yes.
And then the tunnel collapses.
They did have a system because it happened a lot. The soil that was actually there was very sandy, so it's hard to...
They should have dug it under the concrete the Nazis put.
Oh, you're right.
They'd have been fine.
It's so stable now.
Hindsight.
Come on.
Tunnel through the concrete, you have a
Yeah, you got a
solid
perfect
barrier.
hole. So much smarter.
Plastic spoons.
First time I saw
Andy Dufresne.
Andy Dufresne. Get busy living or get busy digging. Absolutely gosh darn right.
And so they had to dig out all of this cave-in, which takes a lot of time. And so the over 100 people that they had ended up only getting 73 people out.
Okay.
By roll call in the morning, they had to stop because, people just can't keep escaping. Right. The Germans are obviously going to notice at least 73 people gone. They'd notice at least one person gone because they count them. But by this point, they had given themselves a good enough head start. And so people were leaving in groups of 2 or 3 or singles, going to the German countryside and try to escape. Eventually, 3 people out of the 73 actually made it back to the UK.
That's still pretty great, number that got out, but I didn't realize it was just 3 people.
Yes. So it's 76 people escaped. 3 of them made it back to England. 23 were captured and returned to the prison. 50 of them, the soldiers who captured them, were given direct orders from Hitler to kill them. And so they were told, make it look like an accident, make it look like they were trying to escape. When these soldiers were found and they were sent to a prison by local police, the Gestapo gets called to transfer them back to the POW camp. On the drive back, they pull over on the side of the road to let them use the bathroom, and then they all end up with bullets in their head. Pretty much the entire last chapter is almost every single guy's story of those 50 guys.
Oh.
Wow.
This is actually here's his name, this is what happened to him, and these are supposedly the guards who were watching him at the time. Some of them actually admitted to it later when they...
Nuremberg war trials?
Yeah, Nuremberg and German Gestapos who eventually were caught and eventually confessed and said, yes, this is what happened, or I heard so-and-so did this to them. That way they could have a proper trial for these individuals who were killed. The book is actually dedicated, it says, to the 50. So the head POW, so he's in charge of all the other POWs, is Roger Bushell. He's a Royal Air Force pilot. He's the one that talks to the commandant. And by this point, the commandant likes the prisoners because they've purposely become friendly with the Germans. So that way, you're just walking along with the German.
Right.
You're not keeping track of him. You're just becoming his friends because you're stuck here. And so that's what they were told to do by Roger Bushell, who's also known as Big X. Because they couldn't just say who's in charge, so he's known as Big X. Then Big X is talking to the commandant. He's been told so many people have been injured. It's okay, well, how many have survived their injuries? And he was told none. None out of 50 people.
My goodness.
That's how he knew, something was up, something was not normal. When people were able to escape eventually, they were able to get this information out that not all seemed to be what it was supposed to be. There was one humorous point I noticed here. So this guy decided to go by himself. He knew German very well. He actually had sewn German marks into his clothing when he got into the camp. And so that way when he was searched, the Germans wouldn't find it. And so he was able to use that to be able to get to Switzerland. His last name was Vanderstock. So Vanderstock, number 18 out of the tunnel, had traveled alone wearing a dark blue Australian Air Force great jacket, Dutch naval trousers, and a beret. As he came out of the woods by the station, a German soldier stopped him and asked him curtly who he was and what he thought he was doing. Before the shaken Vanderstock could answer, he went on, "Don't you know, there's an air raid on. You should be in a shelter."
The question, what do you think you're doing? Instead of what are you doing, what do you think you're doing?
What do you think you're doing?
Well,
I think I'm being berated.
With my beret.
I'm being berated.
Really, why is my opinion so relevant right now?
Hey, buddy, thanks for asking. I really appreciate it.
I've really had it rough.
It's been tough days.
You think the soldiers have it rough? How about us civilians?
It's good to stop and reflect, buddy. Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
But the story gets better.
Oh, okay.
I know, Vanderstock apologized, but I am a Dutch worker, and I don't know where the shelter is. Well, you'd better come with me, the soldier said. You'll be all right. The police won't touch you because I'm an armed guard from the prison camp back there. So this guy...
Oh my god. That is perfect.
This guy worked at the prison camp. It's like, yeah, you look familiar. You must be an upstanding citizen. Let's get you to the air shelter, buddy.
This is why his opinion mattered. This is your perception.
A friendly face. Now, this is a book that a movie you and I both really enjoy is based on. Have you seen The Great Escape, Jenna?
No.
It is a really, really good movie.
With Richard Attenborough, Steve McQueen, and that scene
Donald
of him,
Pleasance, James Garner.
Charles Bronson, because I'm always making Simpsons references. There was one point that Ned Flanders was going to Missouri for something, and the Simpsons are chasing after him. But they ended up in a town, and they're like, "Hey, is this Branson?" And everyone has the face of Charles Bronson, including women and children. They're like, "No, this is Bronson, Missouri. Hey,
Pally? Pally?
And then they pan over to a mom and son, and it's like, hey, Ma, can I have an ice cream? No dice.
Okay. Well then.
What was the worst thing in this book, Bryce?
I mean, especially towards the end, it was just so hard to get through every single paragraph of, here's the individual, this is how he died.
Right.
We were never able to find the men who killed him. They didn't find every single bad guy. And a lot of the people that they did find, quite a few of the really just terrible people, when they were sentenced to death, their prison sentences were commuted to like maybe life in prison, or just like maybe 25 years in prison and then released. Because like the crimes happened so long ago that you shouldn't have the death penalty. And
when you have to put the majority of a country on trial, that's not an easy job.
Sure.
I mean, not to excuse it, but it's just amazing they got what they did.
But it's still hard to read. It's
Yeah.
Like some of these guys were able to escape to Argentina or like to other countries and just live out the rest of their lives.
Sure.
It's just hard to read paragraph after paragraph of men being shot in the back.
That makes sense. That shouldn't be fun to read.
But that's how the book ends. It's like it's telling you about like and then the few prison guards who were caught. But I mean, maybe it's a good testament to war that, you know, whether you're on the winning side or losing side, you don't have a positive outcome.
This is a book, then, that really doesn't have a flaw, though? I mean, like, that's meant to not be fun to read.
It's almost like you need, like, that da, 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 like, action music behind every single paragraph. Because, like, you just, like, it's, like, everything is just, like, jam-packed full of action. I think it's a great book for, like, young guys who are, like, into action books and, like, who don't want to read about Heidi moving to Montana.
So the author of this book, Paul Brickhill, was he a POW in the camp? Is that...
So according to the author's blurb in the back of the book, Paul Brickhill was shot down over the Meredith line in Tunisia. So who knows where that is? On... I don't have...
Some made-up country called Tunisia.
I don't have a map in front of me.
They filmed Star Wars there, I'll have you know.
Okay.
They did. Tatooine. They did all the desert stuff. And the Indiana Jones Race Lost Ark. Yeah.
Well, when they weren't doing that, they were shooting Paul Brickhill down.
It was World War II really inconvenienced the filming of Indiana Jones. Let me tell you.
Field.
There weren't Nazis in the original version of the movie, but they crossed the line.
We're looking for the Ark. Ooh, that'd be a good plot.
Oh, yeah.
Get it down.
It was originally a family drama, but all this action kept happening.
Paul Brickhill was shot down over the Meredith line in Tunisia on March 17th, 1943. He landed in the middle of a minefield in front of the enemy barbed wire and was captured. He was soon transferred to Stalag Luft 3, where he joined Organization X, working on the Great Escape.
Pretty neat. It's neat that the author had that perspective on it, of being involved. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I think, like, sometimes an author like that who's involved will like, I did this and I did that. Like,
it's not his story.
Right, exactly.
Okay,
like, he gave so much credit to those,
good.
Not just the 50 who were killed, but also like the individuals who actually made it out, those who were recaptured. He gave incredible credit just to everyone and gave everyone their due.
Oh, that's really neat.
Very cool.
Jenna, as a responsible human being, you came to this show having read a book, I believe.
You
unlike
just can't
most of our
always
guests.
take a jab at me.
Some of us didn't make up a book this month, Diener. Great Escape.
Yeah, right.
You just watched the movie.
I tried.
So what book did you bring for us to discuss?
I brought Debriefing the President, The Interrogation of Saddam Hussein by John Nixon.
And this was a book you read for school?
No.
No, this was a fun one.
Yes, this is
even
fun.
better.
This book is written by the head analyst that did the actual interrogation of Saddam Hussein.
Oh, that's neat.
Yes. And listening to the audio version, he's actually reading his book. So as you're listening and reading, as I do, you are hearing the voice of the man who sat across the table from Saddam Hussein.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. And that would make it one of the few audiobooks I accept. Well done.
Obviously, it's declassified.
No, we're all going to be shot later.
On the side of the road as we go for a bathroom break.
One of the things that struck me as I was reading the foreword is the author's annoyance about the things that the CIA redacted from his book. As you're reading through the book, there are blacked out sentences, paragraphs.
He left the redact in.
Yes.
That's fantastic.
Yes. So, listening to the audio version, you can hear his annoyance. He goes, the following 16 lines have been redacted by the CIA's Publication Review Board.
It's wonderfully passive-aggressive.
Yes. So in the foreword, he's saying, none of this has anything to do with any current operations. This is not detrimental to anything. It's just that, like, the CIA is just being a jerk. And so throughout the whole thing, he's talking about things that are primarily declassified. The investigation's over. There were no WMDs in Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
So it was all what you would call a post-mortem analysis. In intelligence analysis, we have a technique called a pre-mortem analysis, which is a stopgap where if this is the solution you have, what is another possible explanation? So in that case, that helps to create alternative theories. So the idea in intelligence analysis is that there are possibilities and there are probabilities. It's taking all that is possible, applying the context of resources, language, whatever the circumstance has, into probabilities, and then you get closer to the actual answer. John Nixon spent the majority of his career investigating Saddam Hussein, researching him, creating profiles of him. His entire life was dedicated to finding him, and then the CIA deploy him to Iraq to interview him. That's a huge thing for an analyst, who's usually at the desk.
I've heard that the government actually has, like, individuals assigned to each dictator. Like, even, like, the Queen of England, she probably has someone assigned, even though they're our allies.
In some ways, it's more important to watch our allies than it is to watch the people that we're worried about.
But, I mean, like, I guess, like, maybe you could, like, confirm that?
Well, one thing that John Nixon talks about is basically analysts were put in groups working on a specific country, specific people and actors in that country. So, although much of his stuff had to do with Saddam, he also was writing papers on other world leaders, primarily in Iran, Iraq, and trying to determine their relationships with each other, trying to find any links between their funding. They definitely do have people find out about certain people. He's actually in the Oval Office debriefing the president on these things, and he expresses the frustrating difficulty that is. So.
Please give me a little bit more about that. The CIA expert having to explain to a world leader the facts.
Yeah, and that's something that is huge in this book because he follows several different administrations.
Oh, okay,
yeah, okay. And it crosses party lines. It's like it's all the same.
This sounds like a wonderfully cranky book. That really sounds great.
Oh, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So he describes the insane experience of seeing the person right in front of you that you've studied for so long.
Oh.
So he came with tons of preconceptions. Basically, this is what we thought we knew. This is how we figured this would go down. And then Saddam just kind of sits across from him and is like, what's up? So the interactions are interesting because Saddam does not behave as though he is a prisoner. He is talking to his interrogator as if he is his guest. So he acts gracious and accommodating for, a sadistic ruler.
That's the only power he has left.
Yes. So Saddam would speak very cordially with his interrogators. As a side note, John Nixon does not like the word interrogator because of its symbolism with the enhanced interrogation.
Yeah, I was going to say that there's a reason at this time period you don't even want to use the word interrogation.
Yeah, so basically, as he's interviewing, he'll ask questions, and Saddam thinks that Americans are a bunch of idiots. He would say something that we thought was true about him, and then he would scoff and be like, okay, that's just dumb. Like, you should know this by now. So as I'm reading and listening to the book at the same time, it's like, okay, this guy just is weird. So this, in the very beginning, is Nixon talking about what it's like to be an analyst in the intelligence community. Current intelligence is the lifeblood of an analyst's work. The daily memos produced for policymakers and other senior officials give them a sense of what's happening around the world. The what, and the intelligence community is seeing the so what of an event, so that a busy policymaker has the information needed to do his or her job. So what he's finding is, regardless of who's in power, the information that he provides to them, if it doesn't follow the narrative that they want to see or that they think is going to be the case, then they're not interested. It's like, okay, well, tell me about this, even though you disprove that exists. And more specific on that note is one of my favorite quotes from Saddam Hussein in this book.
Just one?
Oh, there's so many great quotes.
So one of my favorite quotes from Saddam Hussein, it is an extremely condescending thing that Saddam is saying to an intelligence analyst because he's insinuating that everyone in the intelligence agency are stupid. But this quote really inspired me. You're going to fail in Iraq because you do not know the language, you do not know the culture, and you do not know the history. And I was like, challenge accepted.
I recall this. You posted that on Facebook.
Yes.
That's really great.
I was so inspired by this. So I was like, okay, how to be successful in Iraq. Know the language. I am learning Arabic right now.
That's a good start. That's a very good start.
Know the culture. I'm doing a lot of my research in Middle Eastern affairs, and I'm planning on getting my master's degree in Middle Eastern affairs. And understand the Arab mind. Much of my degree is in psychology. I'm using that to understand the mind of human beings, which is just it's surprisingly understandable if you have devoted an extreme amount of time to it.
One of the worst things you can do from an intelligence standpoint is to assume that because I believe this thing, they do too. Right. Or to believe that I'm reacting in the same way this person is because of this thing as well.
When my culture will be the same reaction as their culture.
Right. You're putting that on another person who sadly isn't you. And that has led to a number of seriously awful mistakes and goof-ups.
That is your strategic success in Iraq. In case
throwing some shade. Book Reports podcast. Yeah. All right.
In case anybody out there is wondering how to be successful in Iraq.
Well, it's hard to be successful in that. Like, that is a lofty goal, you know. There's a reason we talk about Afghanistan being the place empires go to die. Like, you know, there's... The whole Middle East has been torn apart by so many different people for so many different reasons. The pieces are kind of hard to put back together on Humpty Dumpty on that one.
Pretty much. Yeah, that's something that Saddam often talks about, is that you don't understand the way that the Middle East operates. So, he basically is taking our Western worldview and saying that is not how things work. Because one of the quotes, I don't recall which president he was referring to, but which may be a good thing, I don't know. So
a lot of Eisenhower fans, so it's a good thing we're not pulling names here.
Yeah. A time when he was debriefing the president, he was talking about...
Saddam?
No, Nixon.
Nixon,
yes,
okay.
Sorry. Talking about the different religions of the Middle East. So the conversation that he had with one of the presidents, the president was like, wait, I thought they were all Muslims.
Oh.
And what he said right afterwards is, if there ever was a time to educate the president on the Middle East, it was then. But there was no time for that.
I can't remember what one of the presidents said. Now, if we could just get the Jews and the Palestinians to sit down and talk like good Christians. I can't, maybe it was the senator. I can't remember who it was, but somebody said that.
I wanted to ask this at the beginning, but I also wanted to give you as much respect as I could, which wasn't much.
Now that all the respect is gone, I can ask this question.
Being that we now know that there's no WMDs in Iraq, do you think it was necessary or even justified for us to go in?
What's your opinion of this highly controversial war that you're putting on the internet right now?
Well, there are so many different sides to it, and in reality, a lot of American lives were ended by that invasion, and a lot of on the other side, too. So it was a bad decision, looking at it from a loss of life standpoint, but it was a strategic failure because the intelligence community was saying there is no WMD, and the failure is to not trust the intelligence community. In my research into the Islamic State and the oil trade, there is a theory that the United States invaded Iraq to capitalize on the oil trade there, which, you know, is a profitable thing.
It's a theory that has a reason to believe in it. Right. I mean, it certainly has legs.
Exactly. At some point, it was going to be necessary to invade Iraq because things were escalating. But as of that particular invasion, that was false pretense and a major loss of life, in my opinion.
It's it's one of those problems where there's no real great solutions.
Yeah.
No matter what president decided we need to invade Iraq, it was going to be bad. Looking for a right answer is the wrong way to go about dealing with the Middle East. Things continue to spiral for various reasons. Things have continued to spiral. It's sort of like Vietnam. Vietnam was a terrible mess before America got there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Vietnam was a terrible mess before the French got there. You know, it's not a problem that is going to be solved by somebody coming in and killing.
Yeah.
It's not a problem that's going to be solved with diplomacy either. It's a question of when we use diplomacy and when we use war. Problem is, though, is when the administration has a certain method they would like to use that isn't backed up by intelligence.
Right.
When your intelligence gathering isn't good, that is never, ever helped by having policymakers who would like to use your bad intelligence.
Right.
It's even worse when your intelligence is good
Yes.
and the policymakers don't want it to be good information. Working in intelligence has got to be utterly frustrating, even when you're right.
Yes, I can tell you
That's gotta be
from
awful.
reading this entire book, it is absolute frustration. And yet, for some reason, I'm drawn towards the field.
Well, it's something special, though. For me, one of the reasons I love espionage is I think it's the funnest way to learn history.
Yeah.
Because espionage is history.
Yes.
I mean, you can't be involved in intelligence work and not be involved in something greater than yourself that's changing the world around you. Spy work is something special and unique because you have a glimpse of something that nobody else has.
Yes.
And you're hopefully shaping policy, and hopefully are able to make the world a better place using your mind. That's something very special, I think. Doesn't work. It doesn't work often, but when it does, it's really something amazing.
Agreed.
What got you to pick up this book particularly?
Well, I would say what got me to pick it up is I often am at a bookstore, and when I'm there, I'm basically taking pictures of books that I might buy on Kindle.
Jenna,
Yes.
you're a bad person.
So,
How can I shut this place down? Research and then
One
get it
match
cheaper.
and a gallon of gasoline. Be quicker and more merciful, Jenna.
yeah, pretty much. So I'm going through, and this one looks fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting is I bought this book like a long time ago.
Uh-huh.
And I had started reading it, and I was having trouble with it visually, so, I came back, and I got the audiobook, which was helpful. This book particularly, I saw a picture of Saddam Hussein on it, and I was like, oh.
Sold.
And then it was, the interrogation of Saddam Hussein, I was like, dude.
No matter what, this book's going to be interesting.
Yes.
And not to mention, too, when the author's the guy who interrogated him.
Yes.
That's that's a pretty good
who
one.
narrates the book. Pretty special.
That does make it a reasonably grudging respect audiobook. If the person who lived through the book and wrote it is reading it, I can say, okay.
Okay, so that's okay with you?
It's fine.
Alright, I'll write
It's
a letter.
fine.
It is okay that you did this, sir.
You got Sam Tyler's approval. Put that on your wall, Nixon.
Yep.
Was there anything you didn't like about the book?
I feel like the things that someone wouldn't like, I just love.
Go on.
Because I can just look at it from an intelligence perspective, whereas someone else may find this extremely frustrating and bland. He goes into great lengths of how he has to write and format papers for intelligence briefing, and I'm like, yes! I'm like, this is what I live for.
Oh, more formatting this chapter. I'm staying up all night.
Yeah, because it's something that's kind of handy to know.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that sounds really good. That sounds like a really fun book.
Oh yeah, highly recommend it.
Oh, in that case, book recommendation fanfare.
I had heard that Saddam Hussein supposedly loved Doritos. Who doesn't?
That's not hard. That makes sense.
Speaking of, our sponsor for this episode.
Okay, I'm searching the book for Doritos.
That is a slight advantage of having your book on an iPad. That is a good way to fact check. Bryce, from now on, all your books have to be on an iPad.
0 results.
Ah!
Sam, you're in perfect health. What book did you bring?
Thanks for asking! I sometimes pick up books, and I think to myself, this book looks so cool. I'm not going to read it. And I save these books for when I read a couple of books. Those weren't that good. Let's get one of the books from storage and read it. So this is a book I've been looking forward to reading. This is The Arsenic Century, How Victorian Britain Was Poisoned at Home, Work, and Play by James C. Horton. In the 1800s, there weren't a lot of safety regulations. There really wasn't any government oversight into what went into industrial application, what kinds of things you fed to children, that kind of thing. I have a blog about using Victorian history in role-playing games. When I examine a Victorian occupation, I always check to see what diseases are associated with it. I assumed this book was going to be about that. No. This 350-page book is just about arsenic. That is the only topic of this book. It is 350-page on the myriad of ways that Victorians pushed themselves over a cliff like lemmings and killed themselves with arsenic.
Oh my word.
And very few of them are suicides or murders.
Oh my word.
You might be surprised to hear a certain amount of joy in my voice, given that this is about hundreds and hundreds of people dying. There's a reason for that.
He hates the Victorians.
I hate Victorians. That's why I blog about them. I have a reasonably dark sense of humor. Thankfully, the incredibly meticulous scholar who wrote this book has the same sense of humor I do. This book that is about people dying, I laughed out loud a few times because it's so ridiculous. Let me just give you a quick example of the wonder of this book. This is just a quick overview of the ridiculous ways some Victorians died by accidentally ingesting arsenic. Perverse carelessness was the way the British Medical Journal described the actions of a woman who found white powder left in a trough by the farm's previous tenant, presumed it must be baking powder, used it to make a cake, and killed her husband. The powder was subsequently determined to be residue from sheep dip. Sheep dip is when you coat live animals with an arsenic water mixture to keep pests from eating them.
Oh my word.
This includes animals who are going to be sheared. This includes animals that are going to be consumed and eaten. That is what sheep dip is.
Arsenic.
Almost incredible carelessness was the way the same journal described the case of a Surrey shepherd who outfitted his well with a bucket he'd been using for sheep dip mixtures and had only cursorily rinsed. He died along with his wife, his son, and 2 daughters. The wife of a Lincolnshire shepherd, being a shepherd's wife was a position fraught with peril, made cheesecakes using what she thought was rice flour in the batter. It was in fact sheep dip powder that her husband had stored in the same cupboard as the flour in an identical tin. What adjectives can possibly do justice to this degree of carelessness? The woman died only hours after eating a cake, and nearly a dozen neighbors who had also partaken were gravely ill.
Oh my word.
There's 350 pages of this. After a while, it stops becoming tragic, and it just becomes funny because it's so crazy.
It's incredible anyone was alive.
Honestly, it is. Like, people are dying by the tens and hundreds.
Like, how have you not learned by now?
Let me just go through chapter by chapter.
All right.
Each chapter, there are 12 of them, is a different way arsenic kills people.
Oh my word.
Each chapter is about 30 pages long. And about halfway through each chapter, I thought to myself, there's like 15 pages left. He can't possibly keep this up. And then he'll introduce some completely bizarre fact that just carries you through the rest of the chapter.
Oh my word.
I'm going to be reading this.
We've talked about tragedies before, but this is on such a huge scale, it's impossible not to find this bizarre and not tragic anymore.
I'd like to point out, at the beginning of this episode, I said how tragic it was that 50 men were killed innocently.
And I thought to myself, if he only knew.
And you people think I'm the jerk out of the two of us? Please.
The first chapter is such an instrument of death and agony. This is all about suicides. Arsenic was super, super easy for people to get because it's a byproduct.
It's in buckets and at farms.
No, it's worse than that, man. Arsenic came from ore refineries, and Great Britain had tons of natural resources, so there were refineries with storerooms full of tons of arsenic, and people are going, what are we going to do with this stuff? Fortunately for everybody, arsenic can be used to do anything, it turns out. And it was often used as a rat poison. That was the most common, easy way to sell people arsenic. You didn't have to ask people what they wanted the arsenic for. You didn't have to ask for identification.
Oh, those were the days.
You could sell arsenic to anybody without asking for ID. Mothers would send their kids down to the corner pharmacy to go buy arsenic to kill rats. So arsenic was very easy to get a hold of. I think it was the second most commonly used poison for a suicide after opium. Sadly, dying from arsenic is awful. Arsenic poisoning affects people in a ridiculous myriad of ways. There are so many symptoms and so many different timetables for death to come. Some people die from arsenic after an hour. Some people die after 4 days. And it's not just varied by how much you consume. People would eat the same amount of arsenic and accidental poisoning, and people would be dying a week later. And the wonderful thing about arsenic is a wonderful thing, is no matter how you get in contact with arsenic, it's bad for you. If you come into contact with arsenic through your skin, it will burn you eventually, which is a shame. It looks so much like talcum powder. If you inhale arsenic, it is the same thing as consuming or drinking it. It is even bad for you to ingest it through orifices. People actually died from arsenic enemas. Like, there is nothing about arsenic that doesn't harm you. You can breathe it, you can consume it, you can get it through skin contact. You get horrible vomiting. It basically eats into your stomach and you get horrible burning sensations. It gives you diarrhea, and it causes a huge amount of crazy side effects, which sadly look a lot like cholera, which also had an outbreak throughout the early 1800s. So if you want to die from a suicide, arsenic is readily handleable. The chapter immediately after the suicides is called A New Race of Poisoners, which is all about how people murdered each other with arsenic.
Oh my word.
During the early 1830s, you had a brand new reason for killing somebody: insurance. And the people who couldn't afford insurance would be part of what's called a friendly club. You give a pence or two a week, and when you die, they pay for your burial. So you get a decent, respectable burial. Some parents started adding their children to friendly clubs, sometimes multiple friendly clubs. One woman killed her mother, her 3 husbands, a fiancé, and I think it was 13 of her 15 children.
Oh my word.
If you were good at this, you'd get about 5 pounds per person you killed. It got so bad, the government had to step in the 1850s. They made it illegal to enter a child under the age of 10 into a friendship club.
Oh my word.
Because people were killing their kids for the money. And arsenic is really easy. It doesn't have a taste. It changes the texture of what you put in a little bit, so you want to make it like an oatmeal or something like that if you can. Little tip for you kids at home. And it looks a lot like cholera. It looks a lot like a natural death. It affects people in so many different ways that who knows if it's arsenic or not.
Does he give sources?
Okay, this is a 350-page book of actual text. Sources go all the way into the 400s.
Okay.
He cites like a crazy man. He did, in my opinion, the best thing you can do as a nonfiction writer is do lots and lots of research, and don't be afraid to put something in your book that's interesting, even if it doesn't have anything to do with arsenic. He puts in so many incredible anecdotes and so many amazing asides. The next one, he talks about the beginning of forensic toxicology, learning what poisons do to the body. And they talk about the Marsh test, which was a way to be able to find out there is arsenic in this body. They died from arsenic poisoning.
So, I mean, nowadays you can do toxicology reports. You're saying they were able to do that back then as well?
Arsenic reacts in interesting ways when it forms a compound with other elements. So what you can do is, if you burn a certain amount, you're able to get a flame through which it's able to create a compound which then comes up through the smoke, and it will form on a mirror. And if you did the test right, which is a huge if it turns out, there was a trial where they had expert witnesses come forward to do an old arsenic test. The defense didn't like the outcome of that test, so they had their experts come in, do a newer test. The prosecutor didn't like the results of that test, so he called an even better expert to come in and saw this test was a false positive. These guys had no idea how to do this test. She's not guilty. But then, it would just go back and forth of, is your guy good at this test or not? And if you did the test correctly, if there's smoke on the mirror, then there's arsenic. Next is called A Pen'orth of Poison. That's all about fun way that arsenic, because it was a rat poison, and we're in Victorian London, there's arsenic in everybody's home. And all the accidental deaths from arsenic clearly labeled as arsenic. Oh. This is the safest place for arsenic, is at the very least people are aware they're getting arsenic when they buy it. The next one is called Sugar Death. Arsenic is a white powder. So is sugar and flour. A sugar company didn't want to pay for sugar. So they go to a chemist shop and they say, we need your plaster of Paris powder.
Oh my gosh.
The chemist was sick in bed and sent his assistant to the back room. The assistant sees a barrel full of white powder. gets the amount needed, and sold it. The white powder was sadly arsenic. The label for arsenic was on the bottom of the barrel. And so these became throat lozenges, which I need badly. And tens and tens of people died from arsenic candy, which the person didn't know they were getting arsenic. They were still adulterating their product. Nobody went to jail because it's not against the law to accidentally poison people. There's no law against accidentally poisoning somebody.
Even the woman who was, or I guess she was doing it on purpose, so
right.
maybe they were able to
if
prove.
you murder somebody on purpose, that's against the law. Accidentally killing hundreds of people because of not using sugar, that's legal at this point in time.
Why did the chemist think, like, oh, yes, I will provide you with white powder?
Well, that was the assistant chemist who was being trained at the time.
So assistant comes in, and they're like, they want white powder so that they don't have to sell sugar.
This was a fairly common practice to adulterate stuff. At this point in time, there's no standards and practices. In fact, some people preferred the taste of adulterated food over the other one because they'd gotten so used to it. One of the chapters talks about how often arsenic ended up in beer. And some people preferred to have beer that was adulterated with chicory instead of making it what you're supposed to, and they preferred that taste. And so adulterated food is all they ever knew. It's sort of like how some people just love boxed macaroni and cheese because they grow up on it, or they're used to boxed lasagna. The next one of my favorites, the hue of death, the tint of the grave. Arsenic makes a great green. At this point in time, green was the most popular color for wallpaper. The most popular color for women's gowns. One of the big fashion trends, fake leaves in women's hats. They used arsenic in baby toys. They used it in cloth for dolls. They used it in anything they could. The Victorians, if there was a way to poison themselves, they found a way to do it. The next one is Walls of Death, which is all about wallpaper. And arsenic, when you use it as a color, it chips off really easily. And so people would sit in these rooms and they would get sick and they would have no idea why. And it wasn't just green. Arsenic was used in red and white and blue, and it was everywhere. The next one is the one that I found the most amazing. Physician-assisted poisonings. Arsenic was used to fight malaria, egg, and there was a series of mountains in Austria where people would actually just eat a small amount of arsenic, and they believed it gave them greater virility, they believed it gave them more healthy complexions, and people started saying, well, if it works for these Austrians, let's all do it. So people were taking small amounts of arsenic daily as a pick-me-up, believing it was helping them.
Brilliant.
And the next couple chapters are poison in the factory and on the farm, talking about sheep dips, that kind of thing. Dangers that lie wait in the pint pot, which is all about arsenic and beer and the different ways it came about that. But the Victorians just made up as many ways as they could to kill each other. And this book never stops. It never slows down. He doesn't spend a long time on any particular subject because there's so much to talk about.
So it doesn't really come across as tedious. Like, here's another example and another example.
There are so many books where the author allows their subject to get in the way of how interesting their book can be. This book is not like that. At the same time, it's a book that isn't frivolous. Like, I'm sure I'm coming off as flippant about this book. I can't help it because I just enjoyed the book so much because it was so well written and just so crazy. But this book isn't distasteful. There are a couple of times where his descriptions get gross, but that's when the descriptions need to be gross. It makes me wonder, though, what's the thing 30, 40, 50 years down the line that our descendants are going to say, I can't believe how stupid they were. They did whatever it's going to be.
Well, you imagine, know? I mean, like asbestos in the ceilings or lead paint. Like, those are our lifetime.
What's the stupid thing? Is it going to be something involving the internet? Because that's blossomed so quickly. What's the thing that we're doing now that future generations are just going to cringe and can't believe how stupid we were?
Glow-in-the-dark darts.
That's a way of life, Jenna. I'm not taking that out of my cold, dead hands. This was a book I absolutely recommend to anybody who can get through a book about death with a sense of humor.
That would be me.
There you go. This was a really great book. It was just remarkable.
Sweet.
Book recommendation fanfare. Two in one episode.
For mine, too. I want one, too. So that'll do it for this episode. We just want to give a big thank you to Jenna Wright for stopping by and letting us talk to you.
Good times.
Thank you so much for coming on, Jenna. You were a delight to talk to as always.
Yes.
You never know where the conversation will go.
that is for sure. Yes.
A lot of death this episode. If you want to find more of us on the internet, which is where you are right now, you can look at Facebook at facebook.com/Book Reports Podcast. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on iTunes. Just type in Book Reports Podcast. That helps people find us better. Give us a 5-star review if you liked us. Don't if you didn't. And you can leave us comments there. We love to read them. You can find more of Sam at skullduggeryandthesmoke.blogspot.com. I'm not going to repeat it. You know where he is.
If you wanted to hear it said correctly, feel free to go back to our previous episodes. You can find them at. And if you are interested in seeing a little bit more about what I was talking about from this book, I am planning on doing a series of posts about some of the interesting side corners he takes in this book that I think will be fun to discuss for use in role-playing games.
And our theme song was composed by Kevin MacLeod. This and other content, including the book recommendation fanfare, can be found at incompetech.com.
Listeners, we've been together for 23 episodes, and that's about 23 too many. No.
I am sick of Sam.
Bryce and I discussed it, and we decided it's time for us to kill our beautiful baby. We are going to be ending the show soon. This is not the last episode. You have 2 more following this one.
So buy the merch while you can.
You'll be able to find book reports online after we're done recording them. We're just going to be producing new content for a while. Think of this not as goodbye. Think of it as get out of my house. We will be producing 2 more episodes. We have an anniversary episode coming up next. And after that, we have a very special episode that I don't really want to reveal because it's something that we've been threatening to do for a while now. Yes. And if you've paid attention to our oeuvre, you're aware there is one book that we've discussed and not read that we pretty much have to talk about on the show.
It's how we're going to end.
I just want to say thank you very much, everybody who has listened. If you have listened to the show from the beginning, you have heard how awful we were and how awful we remain.
And how we haven't improved in the slightest.
Thank you very much for being here with us on this journey. Bryce, thanks for making me do a podcast with you.
Of course. I'm always thrilled to make you do things.
Yeah, in our friendship, Bryce is the person who tells me I can do things that I believe I can't, and I'm the one who tells him he can't do things he believes he can do. That's how our friendship works. No, Bryce, you inspire me to do things that I...
Is that why you made me stop singing I Believe I Can Fly?
Your homemade gliders never work. Don't you remember
that? Because you don't believe in me. I'm Bryce Bronson, Missouri. Diener.
I'm Jenna, inspired by Saddam Hussein, writes.
And I'm Sam, surprisingly excited by death, Tyler.
And we'll see you next episode.
And then the one after that, and then it's dead. But Bryce, I just want to say thank you very much for having me come along with you on this podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm glad I made you do it.
And Bryce?
Yes.
I'm proud of you.
No, you're not. Jenna, I just realized I was nice enough to get you a water, and you have a bottle right there.
She's making this wheelchair thing work for her. Sorry, Bryce, I'm in a wheelchair. Give me a bottle of water, you stupid
you
jerk.
Service monkey.
Nope.
Well, making it work
I bet
for
as
you.
soon as I left the room, you just grabbed that bottle and started drinking it. And you and Sam had a right old laugh.
She drank from mine. I don't know how she got over here.
Oh my god. Okay.
I had 3 bottles of water when I came in here. Jenna?
Glug, glug, glug.